Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. My name is David Reyes. I'm a producer and immersive audio business development manager for Immersive Experience Studios. And I want to introduce our panelists. Alan Parsons, Grammy Award-winning producer of Dark Side of the Moon, Eye in the Sky, and many others. Caroline Hilton, VP of A&R and R&D for Advanced Audio Technologies at Universal Music Group. Daniel Rowland, Head of Strategies and Partnerships at Lander. Luke Howard, composer at Looktone. And Nuno Fonseca, CEO of Sound Particles. And last but not least, Sam Inglis, Editor-in-Chief at Sound on Sound magazine. And I'm also joined by my two co-hosts and partners in crime, Julian Kolbeck and Terry Shields from the Art and Science of Sound Recording. To give you an idea of what we'll cover today, we'll begin with the latest from Alan Parsons and what he's been up to in the world of immersive audio. Then we'll go to an overview of immersive audio, discuss the current state of the market, before moving on to the panel discussion. Post your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll address them during the Q&A immediately following the panel discussion. We've allocated an hour for the webinar. However, a number of us can stay on after to address any open questions or comments. So Alan, I want to open it up with you, sir. Would you give us a quick summary of what you've been up to in immersive audio?
Well, yes, thank you, David. Morning, everybody. Or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I've recently upgraded my studio, which is at my property in Santa Barbara, California, to Dolby Atmos, and already done a number of projects in the format. Most notably, perhaps, is a Pink Floyd recording from 1994 of Dark Side of the Moon, a live recording. So that's all done and dusted. It's in new mixes in stereo, 5.1 and Dolby Atmos. That should be coming out either at the end of this year or beginning of next year. The other one that I've been working on, also in Dolby Atmos, is my third album as the Alan Parsons Project. That's an album called Pyramid, and that's going out in a very lavish box set, which I think you can pre-order it already if you are so inclined to do so. And we're always my assistant engineer Noah and I, we're always looking out for new stuff, looking out for other people's mixes and making comparisons and so on.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, so I want to move on to a quick overview of immersive audio. And we want to talk about immersive audio and also talk about the state of the current market. We define immersive audio as a set of technologies, that is, encoders, decoders, plugins, rack mount devices that enable the recording and reproduction of sound in a virtual sphere around the listener. It's also called spatial audio or 3D audio, and it supports 4 types of audio: channel-based, object-based, scene-based, and binaural. There are 38 commercially available solutions and counting, and 8 DAWs that feature Dolby Atmos. We consider it a game changer for music production, film, and all these other items, because it provides detailed recording and playback of sounds in a 360 environment. It also supports head tracking, which is a certain amount of interactivity for the listener, and it's easily accessible by consumers. All you need is a mobile device and a pair of earbuds to enjoy immersive audio. In terms of the market, there are a number of performance venues that currently support immersive audio. The most well-known, of course, is the Sphere in Las Vegas, weighing in at 170,000 speakers. There are over 300 cinemas that feature Dolby Vision, which includes Dolby Atmos, a number of streaming services such as Apple Music, Tidal, Netflix, Audible, and others. There are a number of consumer devices, most notably VR headsets such as the Apple Vision Pro or the Sony PSVR 2, true wireless earbuds, and then video games, a number of PS5 and PC games. PS5, of course, they feature the Sony Tempest 3D audio engine, and PC games featuring Dolby Atmos. I want to move on to our panel discussion, where we'll cover a couple of key themes, such as mass adoption, AI, and workflows. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I want to begin with you, Caroline. From your perspective, what will it take for immersive audio to go mainstream with artists, producers, and consumers? And then what can we as developers and educators do to help increase adoption?
So I think it's one of those questions. You gave me the tricky one, didn't you? This the kind of like the silver bullet. I'm not sure that there is one. I think the reality is that we are still working with something that is still extremely nascent, and I think some people think we're already there.
Right.
And I think the reality is that it is still iterating, and all of us are still learning. So even when someone says, "Oh, speak to Caroline, she's an expert," I said, "Oh, no, 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 please don't call me an expert," because that would mean that I know everything, and I don't. And I wouldn't ever want to purport that I do. But I know my lanes. I know which bits I know, which bits I may not, but I know exactly who I can go to if I want to get this answer or that answer. And I
Right.
think we collectively need to ensure that we're doing the same thing. So I think there has been it's interesting. So while it's still brand new, obviously many of us have been working in the audio industry and the music industry for decades. So you get to a point where you think, oh, I don't want to ask that question. That might be a stupid question. There is no stupid question in this format. It is complicated. It would be lovely if it was more simplified, but those things will happen. There'll be ways in which this can become more simple, but it comes with time, experience, and learning, and being open to learn. And I think what I would say is, in terms of that kind of the moving forward and the adoption, I think it's making sure that everyone knows it's okay to ask a question. It doesn't matter how many Grammys you may have. It doesn't matter how junior you may feel. You're probably asking a question that someone else may also not know the answer and really wants to know. So I think that's quite important from the adoption perspective. And then I think the key part of that is also understanding where the future might be. So there's a strong narrative at the moment, which is absolutely important because it allows accessibility. But when we use the narrative around, X% of people are listening on headphones, so we should mix, or so that should be a priority. I would say it's a priority in terms of the accessibility, but it shouldn't be a priority in the way that we mix. In the same way, we go and finish our stereo mixes, we get in the car, we start listening how it sounds there, we flick it over to the NS10s, etc., etc. We should maintain that idea. It's just that we're doing it with different devices or different versions of some devices, right? So we definitely still want to make sure we're finding a mix that translates across devices and spaces, right? And I think, if we are to sit with the idea of, oh, but most people are listening on headphones, again, the reason I wouldn't mix for that device alone, whether that's a pair of Apple AirPods or whether that's a pair of standard headphones that are taking the Dolby binaural, the reality is that if we look at 31st of July 2024 and I'm mixing to that headphone mix, that's great for today. But let's say it's now the 31st of August 2024, and maybe Dolby have brought out an update. I'm not saying that. I'm just, theoretically, they brought out an update. Or Apple decided to bring out an update for Apple Spatial. So all of a sudden, that mix that was perfect in one device may now not be perfect in any device because those firmwares have changed. So it's different to the NS10s because the NS10s, other than age, stay the same. But what happens here doesn't. So having that level of translatability on your mix, I think helps adoption because it helps the future of the format when people go to a mix that was mixed 5 years ago and go, that still sounds great. I hope that answers the question. Sorry.
No, it does. That's great. Awesome. And then I want to open up to the other panelists. What are your thoughts around adoption, making it more mainstream, and what can, we as developers, educators, producers do to help that adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I'll chime in first, agreeing, and I think everyone probably shares this opinion that the mix in the room is the mix. Is what Caroline was saying, right? Everything else is going to change, but the way you hear it in your room is the way that it's going to always be, and that's the only truth that we have going forward. So that does need to be a key focus, while also, it has to sound good on headphones too. Otherwise, people aren't going to adopt the format, right? So we're on this. It's part of the. I'm sure the challenging position we're going to chat about, but. one thing that I think to keep in mind as somebody who does a lot of Atmos mixing, but also is an educator on this as well, is that not everyone is an audio engineer. So that's one of the other challenges right now is a lot of when we talk about specifications for delivery and stuff like that, everyone has access to all these tools now, right? They came for free in the DAW that they had already purchased, whether it's Logic or Pro Tools, have you. But that doesn't mean people understand True Peak and understand LUFS, understand other things that they need to, or even low pass, low passing the LFE channel and all these requirements. So there's a gap, I think, in the accessibility of the tools and then the kind of engineering experience of the people who have access to those tools, and it's creating some problems, right? So I think we're also in this kind of Wild West period where we need to bridge that gap, even in the way that we message. And maybe at some point automate some of the process for QC to help people kind of figure out what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong.
Yeah, awesome. I see. So some training, some additional help there, potentially some tools that help guide producers, right, in producing the mixes. Yeah. What about others?
Some of those are coming.
Oh, okay. What about others? Any other comments on adoption?
I think it's one of the challenges for smaller artists is, the economics of it, because the tools are there in the doors, but again, many artists are not going to be engineering themselves. So Atmos can often, or whatever the format is, can often represent an additional expense, which the label, the streaming service, whoever have to kind of make a case for to the artist, because generally, ultimately, it's the artist that's kind of paying for it. I mean, in the early days, there was some room in marketing budgets and the like, but now it's like, it's coming out of your pocket, and you're going to spend the money on an Atmos mixer and a publicist. What's what's going to get more bang for your buck?
Yeah.
As much as I love Atmos and I love I'm obviously, I don't want to be too much of a devil's advocate, but there's some truth in that too, I think.
Right. And then you had a comment, please go ahead.
No, I was saying there are several things, once again, like education, make sure that people come from stereo understand this language, what are objects, binaural, emisonics, all sorts of things. Then there is also this idea that when you think about mixing in immersive, you think about using a panner. So pretty much what you do is, okay, it's a panner, it's for the mixer to handle. And I think, no, it should be everyone, the musicians, the producers, everyone should think about that, which means that they should also have their own tools, because if you only use a panner, then it's going to be a problem. If you have a 3D synthesizer, great. Now you have a musician, I play keyboards and I can play with immersive. And the second part is that sometimes we are almost focused for the perfect solution. We say, okay, now I need a Dolby Atmos, but okay, that means that you're going to have at least 12 speakers. Each speaker, it has to be good speakers. And you start almost putting the barrier too high. For instance, some time ago, I was talking with this fantastic musician, and he said, okay, I have this room with stereo. This is not a very good room for Dolby Atmos. Should I put some speakers in here? And I said, okay, let me tell you, this is not either a very good room to mix an album in stereo, but you have stereo pairs, okay? Essentially, sometimes when I started working with spatial, okay, I have a decent pair of stereo speakers, but then I got 10 speakers of $100 each just to start playing with it. And then from there, I would continue. So I think there are multiple things that we need to address as a community, from technology, musicians, labels, and everyone in between to get this. Because once again, once you try it, I can assure you don't want to go back anymore.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, totally agree. Thank you all. I want to move on. I want to talk next about specifications. So Daniel, besides the Apple Music spatial audio spec, what other specs exist that artists and producers need to adhere to when creating immersive audio? And second part of that is, do you believe additional specs or standards will improve the quality of the immersive audio mixes that are available to consumers?
Yeah, so I mean, there's specs for everything, right? And it depends if we're kind of focusing just on music, right? So we're not talking about specs for Disney and Netflix and all this kind of stuff for Atmos delivery. There's, Sony has some, Apple has them. The only one you should really care about is the Universal Music Group spec, clearly, which Caroline can. There we go. That's what I was hoping for, as a thumbs
up. All right,
up.
Caroline.
But in fairness, right, they were, and Caroline, feel free to chime in at any point and tell me I'm wrong about this. They were really kind of leading in the industry as far as putting out a very specific, stringent, lengthy at some points, set of specifications for Atmos delivery to kind of try to bring us together into sort of a unified way of delivery. And you see there are multiple other, again, Apple, we said Sony and others that have their delivery specifications, but they're pretty much the same at this point. With a few things are different, but by and large, they're the same. And it's interesting to see, though, and this kind of relates to what we were just chatting about a second ago, where they are different. It's more about kind of enforcement and stringency. Like Apple, Universal, and again, Caroline, correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to things like stem separation, as an example, will say like, that's a last resort, right? Like if you can get them, don't be lazy and don't be cheap. If you can get the multi-tracks or stems, do that. But if you can't, okay, that's a last resort. Whereas Apple has had to say, just don't do it, right? That's kind of, and I understand, that's something that was annoying to me in a while until I met with Apple and discussed why they had to say that publicly, and I actually agree with it. But those are kind of two different tiers of saying similar things, right? But by and large, it's the same. You can find these specifications online, look up the Apple one, look up Universals, which are great.
Yep.
And we're good. To get to your second question, I don't think we need more specifications. I don't think that Caroline kind of alluded to this earlier. I don't think that helps anybody. I think we can come to a general consensus on what needs to be done here for delivery of Atmos mixes, and if anything, it needs to become sort of simpler and easier to understand, as I was alluding to earlier, when we have more people that are now, if we're going to put out a carrot and stick and incentivize creators to work in this format, we need to continue to provide easier to understand specs and tools and all of that to facilitate them creating good content, right? Because the barrier, last thing on this, I mean, and this was brought up, cost is a big part of this. The reason that some of the specification I just existed that says kind of like don't do upmixing or don't do stem separation, part of it's quality and part of it's because people are also can't afford necessarily engineers to do high quality mixes and are looking to cut corners. So that has to be built into some of these specifications too, because ultimately if the quality of what people are not putting out or putting out isn't good, like Atmos doesn't survive for the long term, right? We have to have some way of doing that, and specs are a good way.
Yep, awesome. And what about other panelists? Any comments from other folks?
I would obviously like to say thank you very much, Daniel, for being
so
complimentary of our specifications. And yeah, that was it. We did what we did because we felt, we did so much R&D with Dolby when it was first proposed that this was going to be a thing, that we were already starting to make mistakes. And when I say mistakes, it's a very difficult thing because, it's that fine line between the subjective and the objective. And it's something that we try and be really, really careful about. But there were just certain things that we were just like, hey, let's just save everyone else the hassle. And let's put all these extra kind of best practices together to support the specifications. And actually, we've actually updated. So anyone that has the link through to our specifications, we have actually just updated them. I just haven't been able to do the communication out to the wider audience yet. But you will actually see, anyone that has managed to see them, we've actually stripped it back, because exactly what Daniel's saying, it's like, there's this kind of, we don't ever want to seem like we are telling you exactly how to do this, right? It is a creative piece of art at the end of the day, right? What we're doing is going, in order to make sure that you retain that the creative intent of what it sounded like to you in this room, what's the best way of getting that to translate on any other device down to one of those Era 300 single unit speaker systems. If you do all of these things, that's your kind of best chance of success, depending on what you're moving over to. But we've kind of really streamlined it now to try and make it. We've gone down the route of giving the Bible, and then and now it's kind of like, okay, we need to definitely look less prescriptive, because I don't want it to interfere with the creative. We just want to make sure it's supporting the creative aspects, I think. And so I think that's kind of where we were coming from, I think, in why we were, kind of a bit more detailed. Yeah, and it's just because it really does help knowing those little nuances of something annoying like a down mix or trim setting. Really has an effect on making sure that what you intended is then playing back right on a small system or in a vehicle or whatever.
Right, for the end user. Yep. Okay. What about other folks? Other comments on specifications?
I've noticed just listening to various Dolby Atmos mixes by various people. I mean, there's a huge difference in not only in the quality of the mix, but particularly the bottom end. I mean, nobody seems to be able to decide how much bass to put on there. The only thing I've ever put in the sub channel is kick drum and bass guitar. Frankly, I mean that seems to work. But some of the product out there is making my walls vibrate. You know, it's amazing. I'd love to see some kind of standard, or at least I just wish people doing these Atmos mixes would listen to other people's product and somehow compromise their work with what they believe is the best work of others.
Right. Awesome.
I just wanted, if you don't mind, Alan, that's a really good point. That was one of the things that was in our original best practice. We kind of suggested a level not to exceed. It just didn't get responded to very positively because, again, it just seemed like we were being prescriptive. So I'm sitting here as someone that goes, I know exactly what you mean. I think it's that whole thing, if you try and explain to people, just because it's there, it doesn't mean you need to use it. But then, of course, you've got genres which have been praying for this extra speaker that otherwise you're losing all that bottom end. So it's giving it an opportunity to be enhanced. But I think that's the thing. It's always that thing of that it's an enhancement, it's understanding, for the user what that means when they're applying it. But it's definitely a tricky subject.
Yeah, it's tough in particular when we're mixing stereo at the same time. I mean, we're mixing in stereo without the subwoofers being active, and then you have to decide, well, how much bass here is my 5.1 of my Atmos mix going to be against the stereo mix, So that's another decision that has to be made along the way.
Awesome. Okay, I want to move on to you, Nuno. How will AI impact the quality and quantity of immersive audio titles available to consumers, and how?
So definitely AI is going to make a significant shift in everywhere, including, of course, audio. I think AI will especially be quite relevant in terms of workflow, productivity, improving those sorts of things. Of course, we're talking about the audio/music industry, so it's going to take longer here because we have less money to do investments and all sorts of things. Nonetheless, yes, we're going to have, in terms of spatial, better mixing algorithms, best stem separations that could be relevant, especially for legacy content. Although we all know that it's not the same thing as doing a mix with all the material as it should. But there is one area where I think that AI will definitely have a huge impact in terms of immersive, and that is binaural. Because at the moment, the binaural, there is still a long way to improve. Yes, if you are one of those lucky persons that have an ear that is very close to the medium ear of everyone, you could get a very good experience with binaural. Most of us mortals don't get that fantastic experience. In theory, we should be able to get the same experience like we have on the studio, or even better, because binaural will allow you to even come with distance and whisperings and far away and all sorts of in between. But there is a lot of things that need to be done. For instance, from particles, we have a team with 5 PhDs working in this area, and we have using a lot of AI to do personalization to be able to get the exact binaural depending on the shape of the head and the ears of each person. And I think that's where AI will have the major impact in terms of immersive. It's to allow everyone out there with regular headphones to get the same fantastic experience that we have in our Dolby Atmos studios around the world. And by doing this, reaching much more people and actually feeling the true power of immersive sound.
Awesome. That's great. What about other panelists? What are your thoughts on AI?
I mean, if AI can help people, bounce and QC their stems before they send them to me better, I'm all for that specifically. It's a workflow pain point.
Right. Okay. Like a QC bot or something like that.
This entire panel is being controlled by some AI. It's not really real. We're being programmed by some AI entity.
Yeah, I may have helped develop it. I don't know.
That's right. Awesome. Any other thoughts on AI before we move on? All right. Luke, from your perspective as a composer, how efficient are current immersive audio production workflows, and what can developers do to improve those workflows?
I think it's kind of what Caroline was saying. There's probably still a little way to go. And I mean, I work in Pro Tools, which has the advantage of being perhaps the most flexible and one of the earliest adopters of Atmos, but that also means it's kind of perhaps has the highest cognitive overhead to use. Certainly when, you know, the renderer, you could only use an external renderer and that sort of stuff. So yeah, look, I think it can only get better, but it's getting better. It's probably still a way from when someone who's like got a MacBook and a copy of Ableton, and it's not quite there yet. I guess Logic is I haven't used Logic, but I assume Logic is pretty good. But yeah, look, there's a whole list of things that could get better. Being able to preview different binaural spatializations from within the door would be great. There's, I think, audio movers or something, but it really should. Ideally, it should be. Sorry, my cat's on my space bar. It should be built into the door.
Right.
One of the challenges is also, and this is maybe not so much a technology thing, but just finding the balance between making a stereo mix, sort of what Alan was saying before. Stereo mix sound great, and the Atmos one, you don't want them to sound so similar that there's no point in having an Atmos mix, but you don't want them to sound so dissimilar that it's like listening to another track. And this is something I found challenging, particularly with the first record I did had already been mastered in stereo, and we were trying to match the master without any idea what the mastering engineer did. So a lot of time, and perhaps this is something where AI can help, a lot of time was spent just trying to match the dynamic range and tonal qualities of the stereo master versus the mix before we spread it around a bunch of speakers. So that's just a whole lot of busy work. I mean, that's the thing with Atmos. There's a lot of, at least in tools, when, there's a lot of, you can do anything, but there's a fair bit of busy work just getting stuff set up. And like, okay, starting in Atmos is great, and I love it because the rooms sort of mixes for you, and that's really enjoyable. Latency can be an issue, of course, if you're trying to play stuff at the same time. But then you have to figure out how to squeeze everything back in the box and make it sound great in stereo. And if you start in stereo, then you have to kind of unscramble the omelet, and so it's challenging. And I'm all for starting in Atmos, but and it does definitely make it easier as you go through the process. But it also some of these technical things can impede the creative process a bit. And it's this classic thing is, if I haven't done any work in Atmos for like a month or two or something, I've been looking after my cat or something, then it's like, okay, how does this all work again? Whereas I don't really have that problem with stereo. It's pretty. I turn the two speakers on and I'm kind of ready to go.
Right.
Oh, one more thing on the assembly side, like Atmos Assembler is a godsend, but it's still a bit like using sound tools not that I was around then, but sound tools in the 90s or something. It's like, it's great, and it's a lot easier than importing stuff back into Pro Tools and exporting and worrying that if some objects went missing or something. But it's like pretty primitive. That stuff definitely can improve. We need whether it's a separate tool or better support for round tripping within the door. Like, you need to be able to assemble an album in a way that you're confident that you're not actually going to make it worse, or forget something. I mean, that's the thing, forgetting stuff. It's easy to do.
Yeah, of the million settings.
I think it's worth mentioning that I love analog stuff. I've got a wonderful Neve analog desk, and I would tend to do the 5.1 and the stereo analog. And then because it seems we are forced, rather frustratingly, we are forced to work in the box for the Atmos mix. And so I would always start with 5.1 and stereo because it's analog, and then we have to match as best we can in the box for Atmos.
Right, in Pro Tools. Yeah, that's a good point. Any other thoughts on Pro Tools or workflows?
You reminded me about Audio Movers and the binaural plugin. So while it was predominantly built to try and give you the Apple Spatial while you're mixing, I think it's extremely helpful for headphone users. I'm so sorry, Luke. It's so cute. With you stroking your cat, you keep doing a thumbs up. And it keeps
Oh, okay.
on
I'll
your screen.
It's
It
awesome.
was sorry. It was so
I don't. It doesn't. I'll put Lenny down.
oh
That's
no,
great.
no, no.
But I agree. I
Bad.
agree with what you're saying.
Everyone was enjoying the cat and now you got rid of it.
Yeah.
No, so but there's an interesting byproduct to that tool if you are, especially if you're working binaurally. So sometimes, you know, I'm on the move, so I'm not in the studio and I'm just on the laptop. It's a great way of creating outputs that allows you to stay out of headphone only mode and be able to, you know, if you're like working with for me especially, I'm obviously looking from a QC perspective, but it allows me to break down a mix within, you know, within the renderer in a much easier way, without switching over to headphone only mode and then losing some of that visual data that I'm trying to look at. So just something to bear in mind for headphone, you know, people that are mixing in headphones. Definitely give the binaural plugin a go.
Yeah, I use Embodies Immerse VR for that as well, right? They have the Apple render, binaural render in there as well. This is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, those tools are definitely very, very handy.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. I want to move on then. Sam, we mentioned there are 38 and counting immersive audio solutions out there. Dolby Atmos is certainly the most well-known. From your perspective, are any of them, any others becoming more mainstream, gaining in popularity? And if so, which ones?
I think we need to think a little bit about what we mean by a solution or a format or a platform here, because you can divide the production process up into stages. Obviously, you've got audio capture and music creation, and then you've got mixing and post-production, and then finally you've got delivery to the consumer. And some of these solutions span all of those stages. Some of them are only delivery formats, and that's perhaps why they're well known. But you're going, and I think in many cases, people are going to be using multiple solutions as part of their immersive workflows. So, for example, if you want to capture audio in immersive format in the first place, then pretty much Ambisonics is the only game in town. And then if you want to then process or set up an immersive mix that's going to be heard through multiple different delivery formats, like, for instance, perhaps you want your immersive content to be delivered on a streaming service using Atmos, but you also want to play live shows, and you might be using something like the Holoplot system or Elisa from L Acoustics. You might need a sort of format agnostic solution for actually generating that content in the post-production stage. So what I think we're seeing is that in some of these stages, there are clear winners emerging. So Atmos for music streaming and cinema. In other formats, in other contexts, it's perhaps still a little bit unclear. I'm not quite sure if there's a clear winner yet in gaming, for example, or television. And the other thing to remember perhaps is that all of these 38 immersive audio formats are not quite created equal, and some of them do have advantages or limitations in particular contexts. One thing that's true of Atmos, for example, is it's not a true 3D format, partly because it doesn't have any way of making you feel that sound is coming from underneath you, but also there's still a very clear front in the Atmos sound field. And that's not true of, for example, Ambisonics, which gives you a totally spherical sound field. So that might actually be a better solution for something like gaming, for example.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, and I apologize when I say solutions. Atmos is one. RO3D is another example, right? My alma mater, DTS Headphone X is a third. So of those solutions for immersive audio, you know, either mixing or production, whether it's for streaming, film, or music production or games, there are 38 that we've identified, and so I agree. Depends on what part of the process you're involved in. I was just thinking, as a whole, in general, of all of those solutions, if Atmos is currently the front runner, what would you consider to be, let's say, in the number 2 or the number 3 spot?
Of all the engineers I've interviewed, all the engineers and producers who are working in immersive formats, I think only 2 have even mentioned working in other formats besides Atmos. There was some love for Sony's 360, which is essentially MPEG-H.
Yep.
And Jean-Michel Jarre was working in formats that I now can't remember, but he was very exercised about the whole lack of a front. He wanted a completely spherical sound field, and he felt that Atmos wasn't able to deliver that for him.
Right.
But
Yep.
in general, I mean, I've probably interviewed 20 or 30 engineers who are mixing immersive content, and it's got to the point where Atmos is almost a synonym for immersive.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what about other folks? Your comments on front runners in addition to Atmos, what do you think are in sort of number 2, number 3 position?
I mean, they're really, I mean, if we're talking about, music for streaming on DSPs, right? There really isn't. It's Sony 360 RA, and they're, now off of Tidal, right? So fairly recently. So that's not a thing anymore. So you have them on Amazon Music, and that's largely it on the major players. So yeah, they would be the far becoming an increasingly distant second place, in my opinion. And I've done some mixing in Sony 360 before, and that does, you get speakers beneath you, and it's a bit of a different sound field, but yeah, it's a Dolby game, it would seem at this point.
There seems to be a lot of Sony 360 derived from 5.1 or derived from other formats, because people can't necessarily just find the time or the inclination to actually find the right hardware to work with Sony 360. Isn't that true? I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff in the Sony 360 format that has just been derived. I mean, there's some of my own stuff out there, derived from 5.1 mixes.
Interesting.
Well, there's nothing to stop you simply upmixing a 5.1 recording those formats.
Yep, true.
Yeah, and it doesn't help on the Sony side of things that the actual physical speaker setup that you need for that is somewhat prohibitive, right? Relative even to Atmos, right? So it's not just about, I think, adoption on the consumer side of things. It's about the logistics and the compromises you have to make to have one of those setups properly.
Right, you accommodate the additional 3 speakers on the floor and the other speakers.
Yeah, and you can work around it a little bit, but yeah, it's not.
Yeah,
it's a hard investment to make. I'll just say that.
Yeah, and I think there's a similar barrier to entry, Daniel, to your point around RO 3D, right? The additional speaker up top and other speakers that are required for RO.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of this stuff, right? Whether you're, an artist considering getting your music mixed in Atmos, or you're an engineer considering building an Atmos studio for Atmos or Sony or whatever, right? It's what is the return on that investment going to be, right? And how established is the format to justify that expense? I think we're all kind of looking at the same things.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I want to move back to Nuno for a moment. Nuno, from your perspective, could you share any significant trends that you see on the horizon for immersive audio standards, solutions, or consumer devices?
Essentially, in terms of trends, I think there is a lot of things that are going to change. One of them is this idea, like I mentioned, that people think that immersive, it's about using a 3D panner, so it's something for the mixer. So in terms of workflow, I'm going to see in the future much more people thinking much sooner in all of those things. No longer just a mixer that sometimes feels very pressured not to be too different from the stereo version. So it's going to be very defensive in terms of the use of Atmos, where if it is a producer, it can create crazy things. It's a producer, he knows what he's doing. A mixer, unless you are Alan Parsons, you probably need to be more defensive in terms of the things that you do regarding the stereo. The second thing is even in terms of limitations, because the amount of things that you can do as a mixer, the same way that a mastering engineer is limited to the kind of thing that he's able to do, the same thing happens here. Let me give you an example. Like I mentioned, last year we released a 3D synthesizer. With our synthesizer, you press a note and you get equivalent of 8 objects moving around. You play a chord, you get 24 objects moving around. Of course, the kind of things that you can do with that is completely different what you can do with a virtual instrument in stereo, panning in 3D. So sometimes you need to bring this closer to the musicians, to the producers, to be able to be even more creative. And then there is the thing regarding plugins, because we need plugins to support these formats to be even better. It's the same thing that in stereo, yes, you can do a fantastic stereo mix using only mono plugins and then using a panner for stereo. But it's not the same thing. You need stereo reverbs, virtual instruments, or the synthesizers in stereo, all sorts of things in stereo that allows you to come to a new level. Well, you need this exact same thing with immersive. Of course, we can continue using only stereo plugins and then the panner, but we need more plugins. This last week we released a 3D delay. Okay, why there are much more delay in immersive and reverbs and all sorts of things? So pretty much we need all of these plugins to start appearing more. And also, for some years that I've been bothering people to say, okay, we need a plugin architecture that supports objects, okay? Otherwise, we can only use beds to do crazy things with plugins and not with objects. So we need objects to be able to do much more interesting things. And then, of course, there is the binaural that I already mentioned. I think that on the upcoming year to come up with a very good binaural solution that really works for most people. Otherwise, adoption of spatial is going to be limited. So we need to heavily invest in binaural to be able to come with this approach and be able to bring everyone on the planet the chances of listening in binaural. So I think these are the trends that I see on the upcoming years. Once again, thinking closer, not only a mixer, not only something for the mixer, but for everyone to think about the plugins, the objects, the binaural. There is a lot of things that needs to increase and improve. And of course, something that we already mentioned, the user experience, because sometimes on the beginning, you had to have almost like a master's just to know how to route things on Pro Tools to do all the Atmos there. So there is a lot of things that we need to come. Once again, as an industry, we are doing significant steps, but we still need to do a few more to be able to bring this to everyone.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. What about the other panelists? Thoughts on trends, things that you see in terms of devices or workflows, tools?
Yeah, I think Nuno's exactly right. You know, we need to stop thinking about it as a secondary. The reality is, whichever format will win, immersive audio is not going away. There's far too many manufacturers that have now invested in this, right? Whether that's the consumer devices or the studio equipment, hardware and software. So to have artists thinking about it, to be as passionate as we all are about wanting to utilize this format, and when they get those moments, and when they happen, they're so beautiful. It's so lovely. There's not a single artist that has come in and gone, oh, don't like that. They're like, come on, let's do this. You know, using the tools, you know, such as the sound particle tools and improving that plugin workflow to allow that, to make it less complex, less sticky when someone wants to try and explore these things, or find they've run out of CPU, all these kind of things. You know, we need to try and make sure everything moves at the same time and supports that, as well as that prior to consumer. The mastering engineers do not have, you know, all the available, you know, toolkit that they need to be truly able to do Dolby Atmos mastering. It's already a dark art. It's made even darker when it comes to immersive audio, because everyone's like, well, yeah, but the mix engineer's done it. It's like, only by default of trying to get people to adopt the format. When no one should be doing away with a mastering engineer. I tell you, even if it's for the sake of someone who's got that ear that knows how to listen, be that second pair of ears. You know, the amount of things that sometimes have only been one listen, you know, and we're catching. It's kind of why we started doing what we were doing, because we realized that that mastering engineer wasn't always there. And we just wanted to make sure that there was that aspect of, yes, QC, but of course, what a mastering engineer can bring to this, if they have the right toolkit. You know, right now, trying to look at, you know, multiple object and bed mix, and then go, right, I need to try and do this. Everyone that's working in it knows how complicated that can be. And yes, to Luke's point, the album assembler, isn't quite there, but thank goodness it exists, right? But of course, you get to a point of going, you have to use Pro Tools. Pro Tools is not a mastering engineer's tool. So, you know, so then we go, okay, Fiedler's now come out with their tool. Really love it. I actually want to check in with the guys, because it's got so many positives going for it. Of course, it's first version, and hopefully we'll see more. But at the moment, it's only single file. You know, you want to be able to kind of look at, you know, album assembly and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so helping the mastering engineer, I think, is important. And then obviously going back to my point about headphones earlier, it won't just be headphones. That won't be what everyone is listening to. Car manufacturers are signing on week by week. You know, it won't be long until the car that you already own will simply have a firmware update that allows it to start playing back, you know, and things like this. So, and it won't necessarily just be the Maybachs of the world. It will be that regular, you know, car that most people own. So I think it's just being really mindful that it's only going to grow in terms of being available in the home and just the general consumer life.
Awesome. What about other panelists? Any thoughts on trends, things that you see from your perspective?
Do we think that the record labels and the publishers are sufficiently invested in immersive formats? I mean, I've been made ridiculously low offers to immersive mix. Why is that? Why are the labels not supporting it?
I think that's a fair question. The reality is that, you know, I can obviously only speak on behalf of the label that I work for, but we have been putting, you know, massive investment into trying to get this, you know, the adoption. But we do have a real challenge. You know, we've got thousands of artists, thousands of staff, all, you know, and we are all the ones that understand what we're doing, trying to explain it to people that don't, you know, are not doing this every day, and we're trying to connect and make sure they understand that connection. It's very difficult when we've had formats, whether that's, you know, kind of devices or different, you know, 5.1 quad, etc., or a mini disc, or you know, whatever else it might be. You know, we laugh because we go, oh, you know, because they think it's just going to be that thing again, you know, and you're trying to explain to them it's not that thing again, because there's the accessibility of it. That was always the restriction with everything that's come before, that there was no way of getting it to people unless they had this amount of equipment or that kind of equipment. So that's why I say we've still got a long way to go. I actually, you know, I think that we need to make sure that we are paying the right price for immersive mixing. It is multi-channel. Why are we paying less than what the stereo cost, right? You know, that's, you know, that is absolutely something that, you know, the mindset needs to change. But because, again, what we were saying earlier, it is secondary. So it, in some case, you know, still early days, it's only now that it's being forecast into budgets, things like this, you know. So right at the beginning, it was like, you got to do this. It's like, well, that wasn't budgeted, you know, that kind of thing. So so it is that adoption, it's that education, it's kind of getting people to realize this. Yes, this is not a format that's going away. It, in some cases, is the default format that's playing back. Let's, you know, let's make sure that we're making it the best it can possibly be. But as well as that, we're also trying to find that balance between the democratization of it as well. It's obviously very expensive for engineers to kit themselves out, and then it can be very expensive for an independent artist all of a sudden having to find the funds to do that. Bear in mind, I'm also responsible for all of our rest of world territories. So we've got territories where only 1 or 2 Atmos engineers may exist, and they're the ones that have been able to try and, you know, kind of you know, put the outlay, put the money into to building those studios. And of, you know, and they just want to make sure that that's coming in as well. So I must say, actually, what's interesting is we've got a very interesting balance of who's driving the market. And I've seen it where a lot of engineers, they get nervous. They've spent a lot of money on their rooms and they want to pay it back. And they're starting to bring their costs down. And what that unfortunately does is it brings the market down. You know, we end up with this inflation deflation type. Literally, it's like a little mini economy.
Price
these
wars.
kind of, say again.
Price wars. Sorry.
Yes, no, it's exactly that. So so it ends up shifting the market, and we just all need to make sure that we're looking after each other, basically. So it's just, yeah, it's just very difficult. I can understand why people do it, but but there does need to be a correction, and I think that's just an amount of time.
Yeah, it's on my side of things, on the engineer side of things, it's definitely, labels are definitely trying to grind engineers to basically do Atmos for free effectively at this point. And as upset as I want to be, unless it's for like, a top tier artists, right? And part of you wants to be angry about that. Of course, I don't want to, lower my rates to any significant degree, but I also get it, right? If there's not from their perspective, it's a target, it's a box they have to check a lot of times when you're dealing with A&R, right? And is there a massive consumer demand for it? What is the return on that investment, as I've mentioned before? And there's just a lot of things that have to kind of coalesce, I think, for some of these problems to be solved. We talked about the binaural technology improving so the consumer really gets the full experience, since they largely are going to be listening to it in that format. Cars, is Caroline mentioned, which is a big deal. It's one of the perfect places to listen to Atmos, is that those get on board. It's spatial computing, right? As we start to see the rise of those devices through Apple, which is one reason I think they're so invested in this.
Right.
And other companies, that's a big deal. So there's just, we're in this kind of growing period of time for everybody. And there's good things and bad things that come with that. But I don't, it's not going away. I'll echo that. And we'll look back on this in, 5 or 10 years and kind of realize where this was heading. We're just in the period of getting it there.
Awesome. All right. I have one final question for all of you, and I'll begin with Alan. What advice would you give new artists and producers who want to begin their journey in immersive audio?
If they're inexperienced with mixing any format, I would say, stick to stereo to start with. If they're well versed in stereo mixing techniques, and if they can afford, or they have been suitably rewarded to do an immersive mix, then they should go for it. I mean, I think we're still very, very young in these immersive formats. It's very new. It's a very new thing, and it's got a long way to go.
Awesome.
But,
Okay.
I think people should, give it a go. Why not?
All right. Awesome. What about other panelists? Thoughts on new artists, new producers? What nugget of advice would you give them?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I reckon it's good. Oh, sorry, Sam. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I think it'd be good to find someone else on your community that is a bit further along. I mean, this is pretty general advice. It could apply to anything, but particularly if you're a smaller artist, you're probably not going to have the investment in speakers, and yet it's really important to be able to listen to your stuff and things other than just headphones. So I'd try and find a buddy that's a bit further along in their Atmos journey or immersive audio journey that can kind of help you and let you preview things the way that you might be able to do so at home. And I think the tools are getting better. I imagine like the plugins and just things that are letting you start earlier on in the say the compositional experience, but it'll take time. I think also because so many of the doors are so channel based, it's going to take time. Maybe it will be some other product that really engages artists in ways of creating immersive content from scratch.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Sam, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, more of a word of encouragement than anything else, really, which is, I know Caroline and UMG, for example, they have a kind of list of accredited engineers that they will work with to deliver Atmos content. And from my understanding is that some of the busiest engineers on that are people who were not particularly well known or high profile as mixers of stereo content. They've turned themselves into Atmos specialists. They've grasped the opportunity, and they've become incredibly busy, big names in the field, by seeking out the opportunity and really kind of going for it. And I think that's something you still can do. There's still space out there for new people to come through and almost not quite to bypass the stage of becoming a famous mix engineer working in stereo, but to become certainly very much shorten the time you need to spend doing that before you become a well-known Atmos mixer.
Awesome. What about other panelists, other folks? Advice?
I mean, again, not dissimilar from being a stereo mix engineer, though there's some extra hurdles with Atmos. Listen to a lot of Atmos mixes, right? So, which is it's not as easy as just dragging a stereo file into your DAW and auditioning against your mix, right? There's some more hurdles involved in that.
Right.
But even if it's binaurally, just make sure you listen to a lot of stuff. And this is where I think, and Caroline, I think, brought this up earlier about mastering engineers. It's worth, you can hire engineers for not an exorbitant sum of money to do an Atmos mix for you. It's not a bad idea to maybe do that and then kind of dissect what they did when you can get that ADM back and take a peek at it. And it is one place that mastering engineers are particularly important with Atmos. If you're doing mixes binaurally because you don't have a setup, right, and you send that to a mastering engineer and get some feedback from that engineer about what you did right and what you did wrong, right? If you don't have a community around you, as Luke was saying, that you can kind of go to, there's ways to do that don't break the bank, they'll help you improve.
Okay.
Now, from my side, I would say that if you are even just considering, go to some room that has all the Atmos with speakers and listen with some material, the typical one, Rocket Man or anything that you prefer. And that it's the sparkle that creates the energy for you to do everything else. You go there, you listen, and the seed is planted. I'm pretty sure you don't want to go back. Then you have the energy, okay, to get something, okay, you cannot have your dream speakers versus 12 times. Okay, do some compromise, but go there, start playing with plugins, start playing with things. And I can tell you that even in terms of creativity, it's a whole new world. The same way that you think more for the musician, the same way that you think about melody and harmony and rhythm and orchestration and all of those things. Now you have one more dimension that is space that allows you to do fantastic things. And sometimes I end up being here at the studio simply playing with certain plugins just to get things, because I'm able to listen to things that I was never able to listen before. Just to give you a very quick story, I was around probably 15 when I went to see an orchestra for the first time. It was a small venue, good acoustics, and when the orchestra started to play, pretty much on the beginning it was strings. For me it was a revelation, because there was no stereo recording that could give me that experience in terms of sound. And pretty much I've spent all of my life trying to recreate that and experience of 3D sound and try to bring this to people. So go there, play around, because it's a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you all. I'm going to move on to our Q&A.
Does anybody, just while you're doing that, does anybody know who mixed that Rocket Man, the Elton John Rocket Man? Does anybody know who's behind
Greg
that?
Penny.
Greg Penny, yeah.
Oh yeah. Does he have his own studio, or did he do it somewhere?
Yeah, no, he's got his own studio out in Ojai.
Oh, right.
Awesome.
So it is a favorite, that one. I think a lot of people have said that that's a
that's a great mix.
Round mix.
Yep. And we've got a number of questions queued up. So again, we're at the hour. So those who need to drop off, panelists, thank you so much. Please drop if you need to. I'm going to hang on for a little while and just address some of these questions. So first question I have here, Caroline, is for you. Is loudness measured after down mixing to 5.1?
Basically, yes. It's the calculation has been kind of worked on in various guises, but yes, as long as you are on the latest version 5.3, then you will be getting the correct readings. And Luke is giggling because we just had this issue last week. But yes, that's basically what it's doing, because you can't do it based on amount of speakers, because you could have a 916 room or a 714 room. So you have to find the lowest common denominator in order to get that measure.
Right. Okay. Question for you, Nuno. Do sound particles allow you to assign directly to Atmos objects?
So currently, no, because the kind of things that we do at Sound Particles would not be possible to do within the Dolby Atmos universe, because at Sound Particles, we have literally thousands and thousands of sound sources playing at the same time. We have renders up to 1 million sound sources playing at the same time, and Dolby Atmos goes to around 100 objects. Nonetheless, the next version of Sound Particle that is going to come out later this year, what we are able to do is you do whatever you do, add some particles, and then you are able to export as ADM file using objects and even specifying your budget in terms of objects. So imagine, even if you have this crazy sound field or this crazy music with, imagine 2,000 particles, 2,000 sounds moving around, you say a budget, say, okay, I simply can use 12 objects and then everything else needs to go to the bed, and Sound Particles is able to do all of those things. So coming with Sound Particles 3, that is going to be possible for you to assign the directly things to objects, or even allow the system to do that decision, what for you, what goes to objects, what goes to the bed.
Awesome. Okay, this particular one I think is just open to anyone who wants to respond. How far are we from commercial devices, so laptops, phones, playing in surround spatial from their built-in speakers?
The Apple devices are already doing it. So so the MacBooks are, and the phones are as well. Just make sure when you do it with the phone, you hold it sideways. Sorry, I sound like an Apple salesperson here. It's really important. It makes complete difference. If you listen, like, it just doesn't work like this. It sounds weird. And you do that, and immediately it blows your mind. I have to give them credit. It's actually quite impressive. But that on the, and coming out the MacBook as well. I can't answer for, I don't know, the likes of Dell, etc. But
yeah,
won't be, you know, if it isn't already, then it won't be long. But yeah, it's already there. It's already happening.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to keep going then. Can you effectively mix Atmos using specialized headphones, such as the Steven Slate VSX modeling headphones? I think that's more of a workflow question. Let's see, maybe.
Yeah. I don't know about
maybe
the
Daniel?
VSX specifically. I mean, those are stereo, you know, that's the VXX modeling is, you know, for studios with 2 speakers. I don't think they're doing any type of an immersive modeling, but you do have, I mentioned Embodies of Immerse VR, which is that, right? You can choose your headphone model. So it does calibration from that. And then it also is doing an immersive render. And then even SonarWorks now has a version as well that will do that on headphones. So it's similar. Think of VSX, but done for Dolby Atmos, basically.
Yeah. I would simply add that although you can in theory do it, my advice is to always do that with the speakers. Okay, or at least if you, for some reason you don't have the budget, at least, okay, prepare most of the things with headphones and then have a few hours just to go to a studio and make the final corrections on top of that. Also, there are some solutions that for me work even better, that are solutions that actually capture sound from your ears, like things like Smith Research or Sony VME. Those kinds of things can elevate the binaural to a level that it's better than the other non-personalized kind of binaural solution. So just a few advice.
Yeah, that's great. And we had a pretty amazing demo of the Sony VME at NAMM, Nuno, and that was really well done. Brought me back to my DTS headphone X days. It was well done. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm going to keep rolling. Let's see, Alan, question for you, sir. Let's see, hold on. Oh, what speaker setup do you use for Atmos, including brands?
It's all B&W, Bowers and Wilkins. The 5.1 setup that I had before getting Atmos are speakers that are 25 years old. I had them in London when I was living there, and I moved here in 2000 and had them shipped over. I've been using them ever since. B&W make a good compromise ceiling speaker and subwoofers, so we went with those, and I'm pretty pleased with the match between the various units.
Okay.
Don't see any reason to change that, really.
Okay, awesome. There's another question here, which I believe I can address. Luke, feel free to chime in. So this is a question from a composer doing live electroacoustic diffusion over 24 channel systems in a concert space. What's the best way to get to grips with Atmos? So I'll do the first part of that, and then Luke, let you chime in. I'd say take the course. You know, I'm a composer as well. You know, we start with least common denominator, and we walk you through, you know, soup to nuts. What do you need to know about immersive audio? Luke, any other thoughts on composers wanting to get into Dolby Atmos?
I think if you come from that live installation world, like multi-channel audio thing, you're already so many steps ahead that, yeah, you'll find it pretty. I mean, of course, you should take the course, but you'll find it pretty straightforward to take what you have and just assign them, even just assign your existing workflow to a bunch of objects and go from there.
Okay, I'm going to keep rolling here. Thank you. Okay. I'm just trying to interpret these into questions, guys, rather than comments. Yeah, there's one question here about, let's see. It seems like immersive audio would be fantastic for games and sound installations, but for music, yeah, I think the question is immersive audio over lossless audio. What are the pros and cons for music streaming? I think I'll boil it down to that. This one's pretty long. Maybe Caroline, would you mind maybe taking a shot at that one?
Sorry, what was the question again? Sorry,
Yep. No. So the question about for the consumer, right, and consumer, the overall sound quality, is immersive audio better, shall we say, in terms of the perceived quality of the audio versus lossless audio? So, is there really a difference there in terms of the perceived quality of the audio?
Okay, if we're going to compare against lossless, then I think, and then it depends on whether you wired your headphones or not. But no, I mean, lossless, depending what a native rate that is generally going to be of a higher resolution. So Atmos is limited to 2448. So there's going to be that. So as soon as you start listening to anything in 96, then yes, technically the quality is going to be better. The problem with Atmos at the moment, until we can get it lossless down the line, that's going to be a major part of it. So you've got this, multi-channel information being funneled down and clustered, etc., in order to be able to play back multi-channel information. So for the moment, if you're looking at a resolution quality, then yes, lossless, again, depending on what that resolution is, can be better. But the experience wise, from what you gain from say an Atmos playback, it will depend on various things. It will depend on how it's been mixed and what device you're listening on, which headphone representation are you listening to, what, and all these kind of things. It's still got time. I guarantee it's going to improve, because asking me that question right now, I can't say hand on heart every time it smashes out the ballpark, because you have to remember, like the equivalent of the 50s and 60s of going, oh, we now have 2 channels. What do we do with them? We're still there, right? So everyone's still working it out. So I don't want to do that comparison between it and stereo or lossless right now, because not only the workflows, but the actual output resolutions are still being worked on. Is that fair? Does that answer it? Anyone else? I don't know what you think.
I'd be interested if Dolby are considering an improvement on 4824.
So you can mix up to 96 now, but
oh, you can? I didn't know that.
and we're looking, but ultimately, at the point of encoding, I don't want to talk on behalf of Dolby and all the funnels and pipelines that we have, but for the moment, that's kind of where we're restricted to. That's not to say it won't change.
Yeah.
Isn't the limit the codec
go ahead.
distribute Atmos? At the end of the day, there's actually no way to listen to an Atmos mix in any sort of lossless format. You have to go through a codec, and some of those codecs are pretty lossy.
Actually, that's something that we didn't mention here, but I'm pretty sure that new standards will appear. It's the same thing, like, for instance, in cinema, at some point we have 5.1, it had to be Dolby Digital. At some point we start having PCM, so you can go directly lossless. So I think that in the near future, you're going to start having people and streaming platforms simply taking ADM files and then, based on that, distributing the way that they think it would be better, loudness, lossless or not lossless, or you on top of Dolby Atmos compression or customary compression. So I think there is a lot of things that is going to happen here. Also, just to add to this comment, is that sometimes it's important not to confuse the format with some decisions or some mixes, because once again, I could say, okay, I don't want immersive because I don't want the guitar playing in the back or something like that. Well, even if you simply use the additional channels that now you have just to get additional reverbs coming out of it, it's a completely different experience. Even, yes, everything still comes from the center, from the front, everything is over there, but the simple fact that you get the right reflections coming from the right directions around you elevates completely the experience. So yes, you may not like a guitar playing on the back or some drums break up going completely around you, or you may like it. But once again, the format is one thing, the mix is it's another thing. The same way that when we got the CDs, we were comparing the format with some analog to digital converters that were not very good. So sometimes we need to be careful to separate these things.
100%. We need to answer this question in about 5 years' time.
All right. Okay, I'm going to keep rolling through these, and thank you all for staying on extra. We'll give it about another 15 minutes, and then Terry, I think what I can do after we're done is whatever questions are still open, we'll address those in a follow-up, because there's still quite a few here. So I'm going to run through some of them. Hopefully these weren't already covered in the panel discussion. First one, do you think the push for requirements for Atmos mixes by the likes of Apple will push out smaller independent music labels and artists? I believe we covered a little bit of this in the adoption and the specs discussion, but this is actually a really interesting point about independent labels and artists. Do you think that these requirements will help or hurt those smaller music labels and artists?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of covered it a little bit previously, but
Yeah.
I mean, it comes down to return on investment for them, right? And cost. So I think there's been, all of us on the engineer side of things are trying to A, continue to get clients, but B, try to provide value back to those clients where they feel like hiring us was justified. So on my side of things, I work with, mostly major labels, but also a lot of independent artists as well. And trying to bundle, this is just me, but like bundle things together. I'll do mastering and Atmos mixing, or I'll do other things to try to lower costs so they can get on board. And obviously there's, again, as we discussed earlier, there's multiple tiers of Atmos mixes, right? There's like, do you want to mix from a multi-track? Are you okay with working from stems? We can do really good mixes from that. Not quite the same, but those are different price points as well. So really letting people know kind of what their options are while still meeting the specification for Apple and UMG and so on and so forth, I think is key. But there is an opening in the market that I think will be filled at some point. That you see companies, Lander dabbled in this 3 years ago, but you see Master Channel and you see other companies as well trying to offer less expensive automated solutions for independent artists that at least take them a percentage of the way towards a completed mix. There's nothing now that's approved that you can use for that, but I do think you'll see Apple and Dolby come to something, whether it's built into Logic or what have you, in the next few years, because it's a massive problem right now, right? And there's no as audio engineers, we're not going to reduce our rates far enough to meet every bit of demand that there is. So there has to be some other options. Very similar to what Lander did with mastering 10 years ago, right? Where it's like, it's not for the people who can afford it. It's for the people that can't. And hopefully they can build up a career where they can afford it someday. We need something like that here, regardless of who does it.
And
Okay.
we've got plenty of artists that mix their own work, Luke being one of them. But we also have some that aren't as established as Luke, who are literally trying to work it out as they go. And not only do they want to retain the creative control, but B, they just may not have the budgets. They're working from much smaller territories with much smaller budget behind the project. And we're supporting them. We're doing our best. And of course, having tools and the built-in tools in whatever door of choice. I mean, Logic is an absolute go-to for a smaller artist who is composing and writing and then moving on to mixing. That's just been the natural thing to kind of stay in that realm. And we're just kind of supporting them and working through it. So it's difficult, but you're just trying to find that balance between, we want to move forward with a new format, but it may not be easily accessible for everyone in the immediacy.
Okay, I'm going to skip down, cover a couple of additional questions before we wrap up. I've got one more note I want to make here, but one question that I thought was interesting is it says, have the metadata for sound objects, particles, beds, etc., been standardized, or are they all proprietary to each solution? I wonder if Sam.
I think you should answer that, David.
Yes, and the answer to that question is no. As far as I know, they're all proprietary. So, for example, Dolby Atmos has its own metadata format that they encode into an MP4 file. Nuno, from your perspective, I suspect Sound Particles as well has its own proprietary format for metadata.
No, essentially, once again, although Sound Particles have their own concept of particles, what we do is we pretty much are format agnostic, which means that we are able to export in any format. If you want Dolby Atmos, great. If you want IMAX, great. If you want to create something in RAW, you are able to do all of those things within our software. So pretty much we see our software as being format agnostic. You create whatever you want, and then you export with other things. The only limitations that we have currently, it's the objects that you cannot use at the moment. In the future, in a few months, you are able to do that. Nonetheless, regarding all of this, there is one thing that for me it's a significant advance, that is this ADM file format that allows you to get some operability between systems. It's not completely it's a standard, it's open standard, but not everything is supported in all things. So you cannot, Dolby Atmos cannot, receiver can only receive a certain part of the standard and some other things like this. Nonetheless, it was a huge effort that was created, and even having people like Dolby supporting that format, it's something that helps to get a way to get people talking a common language, although of course it's not a perfect standard that everyone uses and supports, but it was a significant effort in that regard.
Right. Okay, a couple more questions. One is the trends, let's see, general trends about immersive audio using audio middleware like WWise, and I would add to this FMOD. This is mostly for video games. I don't know, Daniel, any thoughts on this one? Do you want to take a stab at this question?
I'm probably the worst. I mean, I've used both of those tools before, but no, it's not a core focus of what I do.
Okay. I'll add a comment here. So the answer to the question is WWise and FMOD do both support immersive audio, although that support is limited. It's not really mainstream, and I think we'll just leave it there. We've got about 10 minutes left for, actually we're 20 minutes over for parting remarks. So I just want to share one last thing, just a couple of parting thoughts from us. Again, 38 solutions. Obviously, if you're doing music production, Atmos will probably be your go-to solution. If you're doing something else, a number of these questions are around live performance, video games, other things. Do consider some of these other solutions. Depending upon your application, it may save you a lot of time and money, down the road. Also, to build on Nuno's comment about position and movement of sound in a 3D space. This is a new tool that's available for producers, for composers, songwriters. Think about this early on in the production cycle. I've had a number of clients come to me, in the recent past with projects in VR and other areas where they're thinking about immersive audio at the tail end. They're out of time, they're out of budget, they're out of steam. They're like, well, I just want to do this immersive thing. And it's like, yeah, this is a heavy lift. This is a lot of work, to do in 2 weeks, right? Or a week and a half, right? I have to sleep sometime. So the recommendation is, consider where you're going to place your sound sources during the pre-production phase, and then incorporate immersive audio into your workflow early in the production cycle. And with that, I'll leave it to the panelists for a moment for any parting thoughts that they have for the attendees, beginning with you, Caroline. Any parting thoughts?
Definitely give it a go. Do not invest until you're ready. Make sure that you have a business plan. it's a heavy investment. So start on binaural, as pretty much everyone on this panel has said. Try and get into a room where you can, and try and make sure you listen to a breadth of mixes so that you can get a sense of it. I guarantee you we can hear when it has been mixed on headphones or where you've mixed 4 headphones. Please try and avoid that.
Yeah.
And so of course start there, but do not invest until you know that you can get some work coming in, because I appreciate it's expensive. That's my parting thought.
Okay. Awesome. Alan, any parting thoughts from you, sir?
I'm hoping that you know, I can do more material in immersive, and that for me that means Atmos, because I can. I'm not particularly inclined to learn any new DAWs or any new immersive systems. So yeah, I'm waiting for the phone to ring, essentially.
Okay. Awesome.
And, I'm waiting for the phone to ring, and I'm waiting for a check that makes sense.
Okay. All right. What about others? Daniel, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate, and because some of the comments were about this as well that we didn't necessarily get a chance to get to, that you know that we are all involved in Atmos to some degree, or immersive mixing, or content to some degree. It doesn't mean that everyone is in love with it, right? As an experience for music specifically, right? It's
Right.
always been a challenge for these type of formats when they're divorced from visual media, right? For people to figure out how to enjoy them, especially as we talk about that binaural, not quite there yet, all this kind of stuff. But I would, you know, I think if you follow technology trends, you see kind of where all this is heading, and that it's if it doesn't necessarily make sense right now, the biggest companies in the world are investing this for a very good reason. And it is, you know, we talked about cars and spatial computing and all of that. So there's a lot of different places for this to slot in that haven't really fully matured yet, beyond just listening to it on Apple Music and Amazon and Tidal. So yeah, a lot more on the way.
Okay. Nuno, any parting thoughts from you, sir?
No, once again, I think that a lot of people had similar conversations a few decades ago, talking about a second speaker, stereo, a second speaker, but do I need a second speaker? Is it natural? How do you mix for a second speaker? So I'm pretty sure all of this is recurrent through live. Now we are talking a new format. For me, this is what comes closer to our natural listening experience. Okay. Once again, don't compare the format with some mixes. And I have, of course, as you can see, a huge passion for all of this. Also, quite important, work with the people that create the tools. Okay. We are here. This is an ecosystem. We need your feedback. You need our tools. And we should work together to come up with the best solutions. And pretty much go, try, play. Once again, don't compare your binaural solution, once again, with the format. Okay. Personally, binaural for me doesn't work. The center speaker is never on the center. It's always above, very close to my head. Okay, so don't compare the experience that you get with headphones with the true powers that immersive sound can give.
Right. Okay. Let's see, Sam, any parting thoughts from you, sir?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. I mean, like most of us on this panel, I'm sure I've been recording and mixing music for 20, 30 years. And I'm still learning how to do stereo. You know, I still make mistakes all the time in stereo. So the thought of transitioning to working in immersive audio is intimidating. But I think the thing to remember is it's intimidating for everyone. It's not just intimidating for you. It's intimidating for the audio professionals who've been working in studios all their life. We all have to jump that bridge. We all have to make that leap of faith. And, you know, you need to have that faith in yourself and be confident that, yes, you're going to make some mistakes, but there are people out there who will catch them for you and want to help you. And it will be a success and you will make it work.
And then Luke, thoughts from you?
I think everyone else, I echo what everyone else, particularly Caroline, said. And I think it just seems like with Atmos, unlike other immersive or surround formats, there seems to be a kind of industry momentum behind it that I haven't seen in the past. So I suspect it is here to stay, and the tools will hopefully just get better and make it more accessible, not just for consumers, but for people that are creating the content. Well, I hate the word content. People that are making the music.
Awesome. Okay. I want to say thank you again from Art and Science of Sound Recording, the panelists, Alan Parsons, the entire crew, Sound on Sound magazine involved in this webinar. This has been a long time in the making. I want to say thank you to everyone who's participated. The questions that we didn't answer, we will follow up with an email in response to these questions. Again, take advantage of the special offer that we have for you. Thank you again. We hope we can do this again in the near future. Have a great evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks, everyone.